What was it like to be tutored by the Rembrandt of Scandinavia back in the 1980s? To be a part of the Nerdrum School, as the term came into being? To witness Art Nerdrum's transformation from a social realist to a master of archetypal imagery? Joining me tonight is a man who lived through the fierce criticism of the Romantic Realist movement in Norway. He is a man who was rejected from the Art Academy in Norway, only later to find himself teach at the same institution. Per Lundgren, welcome to the Cave of Apelles.
Thank you very much.
Now, we have quite a bit to go through tonight.
Yes.
And one of the things I wanted to talk about is this small minority in Norwegian painting history of outsiders. Why are they so appealing, and especially to young painters? And how is it that a classical figurative revival could happen in Norway, of all places? And we'll be looking at the critical reception of Art Nerdrum and the other figurative painters, yourself included. And of course we will look at the controversies surrounding his appointment as a professor at the Art Academy.
Yes.
in Oslo. But first, we have one of your landscapes here.
Yes.
And I remember when I was a student and I got to know you, seeing the landscapes that you made in these different exhibitions, all thoroughly well composed and of a very high level. Do you only do landscape painting, or do you do other themes as well?
I think I started as a painter, a landscape painter, outdoors actually. It was very fascinating, the surroundings of my countryside house. My parents had a hut or a small countryside house, and I was so very much engaged about the sea, the mountains, the forest around it. And I think it was just an impulse I got from very early childhood. Yes, I did. Later on, it felt me very natural to continue that kind of work. So I started seriously to paint some landscapes when I was a late teenager. Yes.
Really? Yeah.
Yes.
And then we have Mr. Lars Hertervig.
Yes. Yes.
It strikes me that that you maybe have been at least equally as influenced by him as by Art Nerdrum.
Yeah.
Is that?
No, it go into each other in many ways. I didn't know anything about Lars Hertervig before I came to Oslo in 1980. I mean, it was a name. I haven't seen his picture in real, but when I saw it first time, it was some familiar with the tone in it. There was some silver tone, it was some softness, it was some dreamy scenes that I could find in my own, very early things. So it was not very strategic way of my admiring of him, but it was just, I was very curious, what's this? And then it came to me that he was also a very tragic person in many, many ways. So, but his life is very well described in books, but he was the best pupil we had at that time of Lars Gude. No, not Lars Gude, it was Gude, we call him the god. He lived he was a professionalist in Düsseldorf in Germany, and he said later on that this man, Lars Hertervig, was the best pupil he ever had when it came to the talent he had from nature. Lars Hertervig is born in the western part of Norway, 1830, and he lived on to 1902. Yes. His life is very tragic in many ways, but mostly he was placed in an institution for problems with his behavior, problem with his mental health, and so on. Yeah, I think he spent a year or a little bit more than 1 year in Christiania at that time.
There's a story from his stay at that mental hospital, which is quite illustrative of the problem with being slightly too intelligent. I mean, was a man who taught himself how to read when he was 5 years old, and he is there as mentally sick, and they are let out to do meaningful work, so that they have to dig holes and plant trees.
Yeah, you're right.
And he starts talking about how you could put all those patients upside down and plant them in the ground, and the wardens then tell this story as this shows that he's not very...
He confirmed his illness by speaking like that.
Because he was too intelligent.
Yeah, absolutely.
This was sarcasm, right?
No, and I also had some ideas about... I mean, he was very much, engaged. How is the weather today? I mean, he was from the western part of Norway. The people out there, they just considered that what kind of weather is today? Is it going to be nasty? It's going to be cold? It's going to be windy? He was very, very much interested in the weather and the clouds. And not all people are that interested in obviously things like that.
Right. So he was too interested in it.
Yeah, he was more than interesting. He wanted to make art of it, and he did, of course. He's the most cloudy. He was the most atmospheric painter we ever had in from that period. I mean. Right,
and it strikes me because when you look at his images, his paintings, I remember hearing from different American students of Nerdrum that they've seen the cloud formation in Nerdrum's paintings that are of course very, very influenced by Hertervig, but also when they've seen Hertervig, and they think they told me that clouds do not look like that, and then they come and they see that the clouds do actually look like that, and it strikes me also as a difference between Hertervig and the general landscapes, sort of typical national romantic at the time. That of course in the national romanticism you see the clouds and all the things are there, but he has seen it so much more thorough, so that you think that he hasn't studied clouds, because you have the concept of the national romantic clouds in your head.
You're right.
And when someone comes and really looks at it, people say, well, that's not a cloud.
No. It's more like a head. It's more like an animal. It reminds me of something else. Yes, I heard something like that. What I've been told that if you are very isolated, there is at least two problems being isolated. One of them is going to your work. If you are too much isolated, you can make a mannerism out of your work, because you have no critics from outside.
Right.
The second problem is that if you can't concentrate enough in your study, you will choose something else all the time. And the third one was to study it through academia. And you had a lot of, weather reports from the academia, perfectly. You can see when it was snowing, you could see when it was cold, you can see the direction of the clouds and so on. So I think the beautiful things from Hertervig is that he has created in his own mannerism, a mannerism in a positive way. He had plenty of time. He could stay with the problems for a long time, but at the same time, he had also some problems transforming things from paper to canvases. You can see easily that if you had a lot of sketches, beautiful drawings and so on, but to lift it over to oil painting and so on, he had some problems with that. But in the end, he had a small production. He could concentrate for years with a motive, and that's what we are looking into.
And there's one thing I'm thinking about when it comes to, of course, this is the modern art way of thinking that, oh, you shouldn't follow a recipe.
Yeah.
But the problem is not that that you follow a recipe, but that you don't use the recipe as a basis to study nature.
Yes.
And I think that is what separates Hertervig from the others, that he used that the recipe that he learned, but added empirical study.
Yeah, you're right. A great deal of his production is just something he tries out. He had a lack of supplies, I mean equipment and so on. Brushes, for instance, he made them himself. He wanted to explore the medium in his way. And once again, I think have been told by the professor in Düsseldorf that he was talentful. I think that gave him a kind of burst through his problems. I think he could easily go back and paint a more traditional painting of a sea, cloudy morning, cloudy evening, and so on. But the mystical things he wanted to serve us, to give us, that was what we are looking into when we see his painting today.
Yeah,
it's not like this. It's not like this. It's something very separate but close to, and it's Hertervig. But in the end, the most mystery about this man is painting, of course, but also don't exist any kind of photo of this man. There is no exact words or things that are written from his pen. It's lying there in the fog.
Right.
Very much. And it was said, or I think I read it somewhere, that when he was suffering from cancer in his stomach, they came to take a photo of him, but at this 2 days before they had cut off his beard, and he was so negative and so he was not happy about it. So he just turned around and showed them his back, and there was no photo taken of him. So the only thing we have left of his story, or his point of view, if you wanted to call it that, is the painting, his tries, his fantasy. And he dies 72 years old, not finished. The same with Kittelsen, they were not finished. Their project could go on for at least 50 years more.
Right.
But they died too early, and their project took place for a short while, and the story is too short. Yes, their story.
And when it comes to Hertervig, one thing that strikes me when you see how he faced the situation that he ended up with. I mean, after his breakdown or whatever happened in Düsseldorf, he was, 25?
Yes.
He comes to the mental hospital, and afterwards he's socially completely eradicated.
Yes, yeah.
And that's when he makes his real masterpieces.
Yes.
I mean, I do believe it's the old pine trees that Nerdrum has referred to as the Mona Lisa of painting. So it's not just a question of, in a Norwegian context, fairly good work. It is on a world historical level, solid work and among the best within landscape painting.
Absolutely. He had it. He had everything you ask for when you come to this skill. I think he picked up easily what went on in Düsseldorf. I think he took the essence there. You can find fragments here today, and you can find fragments of his landscapes here and there, but you can't find any exact place where he painted something from.
So he condenses these images and makes into, because I remember going to you have the famous Borg Island.
Yes.
That he painted, And when you come and see it, it looks completely different. I mean, he's cut off like half the mountain.
Oh, it's a very big disappointment because you are expecting, something extraordinary there, and it's just a spot in landscape.
So he is editing and working as a director and as a what do you call it when you do the scenery and the theater, all of this designing the whole stage when he creates these stories. And it's so amazing. I mean, I always think about that. I mean, you can always be a bit sort of down about this difficulties with selling and these things, but then when you think about Hertervig, things get into perspective.
Yes,
this is a man who is completely eradicated socially in a town no one's ever heard of, in a country where no one has ever been, and he makes the Mona Lisa of landscape painting in that situation.
Yes.
That is an amazing feat. And if you're ever depressed about not having a big enough studio, imagine the prospect of 25 going up and then suddenly ending up living in a little attic room with your father and painting there.
It's 5 meters to 2.
Yeah.
I mean, it's it's an unbelievable story about him and his father living there.
Yeah.
They had a kind of touch with this Quaker movement.
Yeah, they were Quakers,
yes.
Right.
And a lot of people try to understand what's the meaning of the Quaker, and could Lars Hertervig have been in touch with some ideas connected to the Quaker and so on. A lot of people have tried to figure out if he was the inner light painter in many ways.
So
because they were believing the Quaker movement, they were believing or were told that the inner light was so much, very much important for every human being. Because if you have the inner light in yourself, you can prevent the darkness to come into your
soul.
Your soul. Yes, the devil is in the darkness and so on. I don't think they were so in close contact with the Quaker movement, but after all, I've been told that the Quakers was isolated. But also a very strong movement in Lars Hertervig's surroundings.
Right.
Yes.
Right. One last thing about him that strikes me. You're speaking of isolation.
Yes.
And how do you survive? Now, I guess it's not for everyone, but there's one story of him being what's the English phrase? When there was no social security at the time,
yes,
so you were sent to farms and you could work a little bit and you got food and a place to live. And he's out painting and they're coming to fetch him to work, to do some logging or something like that.
Yes.
And
it's
then
kind of duty work.
Right. You pay for your food, or work for your food. And apparently someone must have been with him because he sees them approaching and then he says, "Oh, we'll have some fun now." And when they come closer, he says, "Oh, can you see my father? He's hanging there in the forest there." And then they understand that he's not present today, so they just left him. And when they walk away, he just sort of laughs and continues painting.
Absolutely, I heard about that story too.
Yeah.
I think it was told by his sister. That was interviewed by a biography, Aslaug Blitt.
Yeah.
Aslaug Blitt, she interviewed his sister, and stories like that could be true.
Yeah.
If you compare to, I mean, it has been always a joke that you have to suffer to be an artist and so on, and you need the suffering to show how life is. There is some fragments in that I can understand, but I think. The situation for Kittelsen and also for Lars Hertervig, you see, Kittelsen, he was very aware of what's happening in Europe. He had trips to Paris. He had a stay in Munich twice, I think. He knew a lot of things that was going on in Europe. He wrote about it later on. Compared to this, I mean, he was born in 1857. He knew about kind of movements, impressionist, realism, natural socialism. He knew about a lot of things that was going on. Even wars took place in Europe. But he was very untouched by it. Hertervig, he knew exactly the same. He was born in 1830. He could see a lot of things that happened through his life. I think he was not blind or deaf or was not interested in European development and so on. I think he got some ideas that this is not for me.
Right.
I put all I have to my talent. I wanted to stay here. I'm going to be very local and see how it will go on for me. Today, Kittelsen is the most popular and most famous artist ever in Norway, after Edvard Munch. And Hertervig is the great landscape painter we ever had in Norway, Scandinavia at all. So they took a risk, but today we can see the result.
When it comes to Hertervig, he's so obviously not a national romantic, not a naturalist.
No.
When you look at the Borg Island,
Yes.
which is an amazing, how it opens up when you really study it.
Yes.
I remember Nerdrum talking about its inverted perspective,
Yes.
like in the icons. But actually it has two perspectives. You have the foreground
Yes.
that goes in the normal sort of Renaissance perspective.
Yes.
And then you have the Borg Island and the clouds coming out towards you. So one part goes in, and so that the island comes even stronger at you.
Yes.
And I was wondering, I have no idea, of course we know very little about him, but he did some sea journey on a boat, working as some kind of a sailor or so, when he was sick, after he had been sick.
Yes.
And apparently they stopped in London, but they were in England.
Okay.
Do you think he might have seen something by Turner or Leonardo even? Because this idea of inverting the perspective, where does it come from? Because it's emphatically not Norwegian, not national romantic, not naturalist.
So how did it...
Do you have any idea? I mean, was it... of course, two people can have the same idea at different places without knowing about each other, but...
I think this wealthy family called Kielland, I think they could show him some illustrations from the great masters in Europe. I think that's possible.
Yeah, of course, you had a big tradition of prints and...
I think they had some books, some stories about what went on in Northern Europe. If you could learn something from it, yes. If you could cope with some of those stuff, no. I think he took a drop here and a drop there, and I think mostly that he was so isolated that, and as I said earlier, I think he had a kind of mannerism that's the only thing he could trust in, mannerism, to stay on these roads. And Turner, I think he also went into kind of mannerism. You can easily see it from 10 meters that this is a Turner picture, no doubt. I think it's a result of isolation at all, that there is a mannerism in it. But if he had seen an original painting of Turner, I don't think so.
No.
I'd be very surprised.
I have no idea, but it was just an intriguing thought.
Yes.
But then, of course, there is also Edvard Munch, whom you mentioned.
Yes.
And he is that's the strange thing about the Norwegian tradition, that you have. Well, I'm not so sure about Kittelsen, but at least Munch and Hertervig, together with Nerdrum, are the only really old master painters in Norwegian tradition. I mean, you have, not bother the viewers with too many Norwegian names, but you have these 1850s, 60s painters that learned academic style, which is an echo of Caravaggio, you could say.
Yes.
But then that sort of just stops in the late 19th century. But these, especially Hertervig and Munch in the 19th, 20th century, have that drama, they have that pathos.
They have. I think if Kittelsen had achieved more free time for himself, I think he could create more dramatic stuff than he did. I think he, in many ways, he came into also a kind of mood because of his illness, that he wanted something the very opposite of drama. Silence, softness, calmness, calm, see no waves. I think he had so much pain in his body, and he was a very sensitive man. So I think he went more and more back to this calm, contemplative motives. There is a story that Edvard Munch, wealthy man, wealthy artist, very well known, came to Bergen, and saw one of Kittelsen's work. This white horse coming up during the nighttime, full stretch, and he admired it. He said so. He admired that piece. And if he had bought it, it would be a sensational act from him that Kittelsen could live for many years. He didn't. Instead, the collection of Meyer in Bergen bought it, but the story is there. He admired it strongly. He said so, but he couldn't dare to buy it. And I leave it there.
Okay, so we're sort of coming back to where we started, or approaching sort of the 1960s again. And I think Munch, in that sense, can sort of work as a nice segue into that, because it's so strange that a man who is so talented, so cultivated, still falls in the face of fashion, and he sees the expressionists and he thinks he's gotten old. And that's a very strange situation. So, and he is such a famous person that do you think it's fair to say that he shows that the demise of the classical tradition within painting in Norway? Yes,
it was a kind of just before Kittelsen dies in 1914. It was a kind of end of an era. It was a story that went on. What are Norway, the academical part of Norway, going to choose? The German narrow school or the French, what do you say, more loosely, more style? And it was very close, but they went for the French mannerism, modernism at that time. It was one or two professors that could tiny French, and then they were giving the lead role in the academia in Norway. Because of this, they could speak French and they understood what went on in Paris, and they were dominating the whole picture, the scene. I mean, in Oslo at that time. So when Bork Nerdrum, born in '44, came into this French style, the French province modernism everywhere in Oslo, I think it was quite a shock.
Yeah,
that was the biggest contrast they ever seen. I mean, he was asking for something completely else. They were serving vegetables, but he preferred meat. And you see, then you have to go to another restaurant, or you have to choose your menu here, or you have to eat what we have in this restaurant, and that's only French fries. Okay, And the conflict, I think it was from the very moment he went to the academy at that time, and he was frustrated. And I also think that the teacher were very frustrated too, because they couldn't give him what he asked for.
So walk us through that, because then I wanted to talk about your time with Nerdrum with the 80s and the changes that happens with his production there. Yes. But we're sort of going chronologically here, so let's stick with the 60s and go and move upwards. What was the reception of Nerdrum?
Yes, it has been told. I don't know exactly what happened, but it was told that it was a conflict between his style, his personality, the time, the institution, the criticism that went on in the newspaper. It was a conflict everywhere. At the same time, it was declared that conflict, it was perfect for the evolution of art. So he took it directly on that word and said, okay, do you want a mess, or do you want a fight, or what do you want? We don't want you, he was told. So he was thrown out from the academy in 1962 or 3, I think, at that time. And that was very good for him, I think. Yeah. Yes, and also for the institution itself. So
it was a happy divorce.
Somebody here must admit that it was good for every part of the conflict. Yes, but it was you have already mentioned it. It was a movement. It was not a lot, but it was some people that found each other from the same time. They call it the realism and the romantic style movement, and they got together and they achieved to satisfy public.
Yeah, and this is part of the reason why we agreed to talk a bit about Hertervig, because according to Nerdrum, the Hertervig exhibition of '62
could be
was quite important when it came to sort of kickstarting, or at least giving an impetus to a classical figurative revival.
Yes,
in Norway.
Yes, at that time I think that the landscape painters, it was a lot of them too, not a lot of them, but they were studying Hertervig very much because of this re-established Hertervig, that kind of exhibition. The story about Hertervig himself was very fascinating, especially for young people.
So there was an appeal in the
yes, I think to be suffering and to be a genius and all that stuff, it belongs together. And I think Odd picked up a lot. What it picked up, I don't know, from the 60s, but later on, 80s and 90s, he was so engaged in his stuff.
Yeah,
I think he saw more clearer, and without this kind of affection of his bad life and so on. I think he saw a kind of mannerism that was very positive, because I'm not speaking about mannerism as a positive thing,
right.
Not something that went on and repeating itself. I'm speaking about mannerism as a kind of concentration, and a very positive thing.
And you've talked about earlier, and that was quite a surprise for me, that Hertervig was a formal influence, or could be seen as a formal influence on Nerdrum, in the way how he tightens up his work, especially in the 80s and 90s.
You're right, absolutely. After the 70s.
Because Hertervig is very sculptural, very clear, without being drawn.
No, you're right. You're right. You have absolutely some paintings that shows you're right. He started to sharpen every shape. He started to make it clear in every sense of the word. This is this. This is this and this is this, and all those things, they belongs to one piece, like that.
So to be able to give each form its individuality without it popping out of the context.
You're right. And later on, as always did, he was so engaged, and then he dropped it.
Right.
Always. And he said, fell in love, let's come out of it.
Yeah.
See what it is from a distance, and perhaps you go back to it.
And this is very strange, because you wouldn't immediately think, Hertervig.
Yeah, no.
It's they are quite far apart. I mean, it's not given that a young painter trying to emulate Caravaggio, especially in the 60s, 70s, should find something in Hertervig.
No. He was very hard, insisting that this has big values for all of us, but mostly for me. So we were just following and see, how can you use this? How can you use it? But as I said earlier, I think I understood his compassion to his work, to Hertervig's work, but also his, talent for seeing gold fragments here and there in history.
Right. Could you tell us about how it was coming to the studio? And the reason why I'm asking is that it seems to me to be a tendency among perhaps too many figurative painters to talk about how you should just paint. Don't think, just paint. And if it's one thing I think about when it comes to Nerdrum's studio, it is the emphasis on being a cultivated person. What kind of literature were you introduced, or was read at the studio? Did you discuss it?
I understand. You see, we were quite young at that time, but we had then some of us had the kind of education. All hasn't hardly any kind of education, but to me it sounds like he had read everything. Shakespeare, yes, the great national themes, Ibsen, Kielland, he knew about everything. So Hamsun, of course, the Scandinavian period, he could easily recitate whatever it was. And it was, he was 15 years older than us, but he was very patient. So he hardly gave us any kind of ideas about read this Dostoevsky, the Russian, Gogol, whatever it is. He just mentioned them. He took fragments from Hamsun and said, look at what's going on here. Listen to this voice. So it was more up to us to say, okay, I pick up that book.
Right.
I will pick up that. Of course, next time I will try to have a kind of conversation about this book. But that was the way. And besides books, it was music. It was, we took trips to Italy, Holland, Sweden. So being in the Nerdrum School, that means it was not a school in the ordinary way. It was a very free, 24 hours a day school. It was, and he took us to many, situations that we normally wouldn't join. We met people on a certain level that he said, I know them, they're not my friends, but I know them, speak with them. People from the film industry, people from theater. Yes, they all came to us through Odd. That was the Nerdrum School. He used his position. I have no position, he said. Can't be true. People came to his life, and they came also to us. So they came to school. Our school.
Right, and there was one specific review where the Nerdrum School was coined, right? Came into being.
Oh yeah, you see, yes, why not? You say Nerdrum School. Oh, it's very touchy to have a school. I mean, yes, why not? You heard about the London School. That was very positive. It was a sensation. We heard about the so-called French school from the very start of the 19th century. Odd said clearly, I have no students at my school. I have assistants. That's something else.
Yeah.
And he was very, very precise on that. I have no students. I have only assistants. So he took us to the television and declared, this is Nerdrum School. We presented ourselves as a kind of mixture between students and assistants. And later on, it was presented as in 1986 as the Nerdrum School exhibition. And the critics said, you know for sure, every school is a boring one. But when they opened the so-called London School exhibition at Astorfærne Museum, they were so excited.
Right,
Yeah.
okay.
So we just laughing about the whole situation. It was a kind of mob, that's all.
Right.
That stood for this criticism. And in the end, what's the academy? That's a real school.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's a real school, I mean. And they were all trying to belong to all the values that this school could give them. There was a struggle to convince themselves that I am a part of this academy. That's a school. That's a school.
This is a good reminder of what we were going to talk about before we came to the 80s.
Yes.
The reception of Odd Nerdrum's work. I mean, I've written about this myself. Some of these adjectives that were used from the very beginning.
Yes.
And I went through it quite quickly just before we met, and I don't know how much time we shall use on this, but you can imagine being criticized throughout the years with the following: being theatrical, sentimental, melodramatic, pathetic, monumental, eternal, banal, tragic, seductive, museum-like, carnival, salon-like, old masterly, a virtuoso technique, schematic, mechanical, basing yourself on effects, making pastiches and imitations, etc., etc., etc. Do you have something to add to that?
I can just confirm that those nasty words, some of them are true. And it's very attracting for young people.
Yeah.
Yes. That many adjectives.
Yeah.
Yeah. Young people, they want adjectives all the time. So come on with them. So I think Odd was, he's hardly read criticism. No, the critics was just some lunatics. He dropped it easily. I saw it when he picked up a newspaper after an exhibition opening. He just look at the photo. Yeah, the photo is okay of the picture. That's good. And there was a small text here and there. Okay, drop it. He didn't read it. No, he was told what's in it by others, but he hardly read it.
Right.
And
but I think this is given what you're saying there, this is also perhaps something then to emulate, to not go into what the critics say and be totally overwhelmed by it, because you will be able to work.
I mean, if you have a dog yelling at you, you don't stop there and try to, what do you want, dog? I can't understand you. It's not me. It's something, I'm kind. You don't speak with a dog yelling at you. You just leave it. You just leave it. I mean, he knew for sure that those kind of adjectives, that couldn't put him down. Yeah. No, it couldn't put his work down. Right. He would just stay on those roads, paint, hard working, and then in the end, the criticism will not be quiet, but people will perhaps change their point of view later on. So his project is more than one man's lifetime. It's going to be the future for many, many critics after this. And that's the whole project. It's saved in many ways in that way. You never know what's coming up. The criticism is a delirium for a short period.
And this, I guess, when you look at what he did in the 70s, in the so-called social realist time, for example, this painting called The Meeting.
Yeah.
They're in sort of 70s clothing, but the eyes of that woman is not 70s.
No.
And the passion of Andreas Baader is not 70s.
No.
And I guess that's one huge benefit from thinking on a much grander perspective.
Yes, there are.
That you are not, for example, in this specific case when you're talking about criticism, you are not weighed down, or at least not destroyed by it, because you have a greater view of the point of your work.
The project is absolutely bigger than just for decades.
Right.
Yeah, it will continue.
Right.
Yes, yeah.
So I think a lot of painters would really take that to heart and be really affected by it. I mean,
yes, normally.
To the detriment of their work.
Yes. I think especially young people are very fragile when they come to criticism. Absolutely, and it's hush people living from be a critic. They have no responsibility. I read a lot of it, and it's so it's so dominated. The criticism is so dominated by the common sense from its time.
Yeah, consensus.
Consensus. Also common sense also among critics. They have their own language. They have their favorites. They prefer this and that, and suddenly they just are lost because the painting is still there. I mean, odds. Yeah, you mentioned the meeting, the painting, the meeting. It has fragments from many periods, strange periods. The clothes, the touch of the skin. Their eyes, you mentioned it. It's free from time criticism. Can't use local time to make a critic
even
of that.
Even when he was a social realist, so-called.
So-called.
Right.
He went on with a big drawing because at that time it was this horrible conflict in the Middle East about Israel and Palestinian. And he saw a photo or something. It was lined up for 100 meters with prisoners, Palestinian, all of them. They had something that could prevent them to see. They would cover their eyes with a cloth, and they were bounded on their back. Their hands were back on their back. Yeah. And he saw a beautiful scenery there that he started to draw prisoners. And that the drawing should be a so-called study for the huge canvas. So we went down to the Muslim society in Oslo and picked up some models, could pose for him. And he, as usual, he wanted to not become friend of them, but he was listening to them. And he stopped the work with it, the big canvas, and said that, no, I can't do this. I think he made a kind of statement for himself that this was not his future, to be a political commentary through painting. He had been through that with a huge canvas called the Vietnamese...
the Refugees at Sea.
Yeah, Refugees at Sea. And he also he admitted that he couldn't say for himself or for everybody else of us that he took favor of them. He was very directly and said that perhaps a lot of those people I'm trying to make heroes of, perhaps they are bandits, perhaps they are killers, perhaps they are common terrorists. And he said that I'm trying to get out of this. No, I wanted to find something new. So now we are back after an exhibition in New York, 1982-3, and he came back, started one more time, his last effort to make a social realistic painting. He put a Negro into a motive, and half naked, and he became more and more naked, and this desperate Negro man, he was suffering from a hit from...
In the motif?
Yes, absolutely,
right.
Very dramatic. And then day by day, he said to himself, no, this is not going to be New York Commons. This is going to be on something else. And he took away everything that he could find in the picture, the last fragments of the clothes, and opened up the landscape and said, let's get out of it. If there is problem in your life, get out of it. If there is harassment in your life, get out of it. So you open up the picture, make a beautiful horizon, and you can easily see far away that a man was running away from the whole situation. That could explain his, his point of view. You have to decide yourself if you're going to suffer of harassment, or at least don't be a terrorist yourself. You have to take action here, leave the situation, seek the nature, seek the totality. And then, for a sudden, it opened up.
It's almost like a recapitulation of
Hertervig
then.
Yeah, it was just he just
leaving the contemporary time.
Yeah, he just opened up, take away all the fragments from our lousy time, and put the humans clearly, primitive or not, naked, half naked, put it into the eternity, and see what happens.
I have this book here on the Persian landscapes.
Yes.
Which was one of the sources. Are there other things that influenced in that time?
First of all, I do think I remember exactly that small book he picked up. He picked up fragments here and there, spots here and there, and he used it for his own purpose. That means where he could fit in. He never copied something from books. No, he took the atmosphere. The books was on the floor, lying there and here. He had a short glimpse on it, and yeah, I can see that. I use it here, like that. He didn't copy anything. No. If he wanted to have a so-called support from a photo, you could never see it directly. You can never recognize that he took exactly that fragments. And the project was the motive, the idea, and the surroundings, the landscape and so on, should not only, but it should fill out the whole idea. So if he wanted the real loneliness, he went to the moral life. Yeah, it could be Far East, look like desert areas.
Yeah.
Yes. If he wanted to be more erupted and more brutal things, he went to Iceland to have his landscapes fit in. And his so-called harmonic paintings for the summertime, he went to the coastline of southeast Norway, found them there. Yes. Right. He could choose. He could find them everywhere. It was a book I gave to Odd in 83, 84. He already started on his new style, his new ideas. This book was made by the Swedish author called Per Christian Jersil, after the flood. My uncle gave it to me and said that I think, can you give this book to Odd Nerdrum? I don't know him, but I think this book will be interesting for him to read. I gave it to Odd, and he was finished with that book after 2 days, perhaps one night, I don't know. And admit that was a kind of opening. Mm-hmm. But again, it was nothing to illustrate in that book, right. But it gave it a kind of opening. To me, it was just an ugly book about a desperate bunch of people in the Baltic Sea after an atomic catastrophe or whatever. It was just the essence of a world trying to find a kind of harmony, a desperate search of harmony. But it was an impossible thing to achieve.
So they sort of ended up in what is called the natural state, nature state, or...
Yes, I mean, I think that book of Jersil, the Swedish author, I think it gave an opening. And that was he was open himself for an opening. He was very hush on people that was trying to tell him how to paint, what to paint, and so on. But this time he said there was something fascinating in this world. I don't think he read anything else of Jersil, but just exactly this book, After the Flood.
It seems like there were many sort of gateways into this new world.
Yes.
Suddenly he's sitting in an airplane on New Year's Eve. And he sitting there on New Year's Eve somehow makes him understand that time is completely meaningless, because when you're in outer space...
Yes, I understand.
So I guess that's what happens to him. I mean, I think when we're sitting here, if we suddenly should shoot 5 million miles straight up and stand still, and someone gives you a push, you start turning, and then they ask you to say, well, where's forward and backwards,
yes,
and upside and down, and left and right. It can be anywhere.
Yes, but I think it was a radical change. Beginning of the 80s. I think it's he starting to read more generally literature about the Germans' philosophy. But I think he had some ideas about Rousseau. I think he had some idea about Schopenhauer, the Germans mostly, and Nietzsche. I think he had at a certain level some idea what was in that stuff, but he started to be more professionally engaged. So I think he also mentioned in some connections that it was very important for an educated artist to have philosophy as a solid background. Yes, absolutely. So we started more and more to speak about problems, conflicts, sources for a modern so-called discussion. And I think he found it not only interesting but also very funny in many ways.
Because this is obviously before my time, but as far as I've gathered, in the 80s he is also becoming specifically, explicitly interested in aesthetic philosophy too. You mentioned Hegel. I mean, he did hold a lecture at the university about that, right?
Typical for that period. Yeah. Odd was very up. He was very upcoming in many ways, in the broadcasting, in television, and even some talk shows. He was invited very much. He said some abrupt things about seriously things. People starting to laugh and think and laugh again, and then he took some risks more and more. So I think the leading teams or people at the University of Oslo found it very interesting and also an occasion for having fun with an artist coming to the temple to speak about philosophy. Yes, he did. That was in 1982.
So
yes.
I think
he spoke about timeless art. Yes,
he did.
Yes, he did. And of course, it was very apocryph stuff to bring to the university that was so clearly educated in one school. That means we have a very early start and then in the history and ended up today. It was a linear show that knew very much about. But Odd was so apocryph that he wanted to speak about circles, he wanted to speak about things that repeated themselves, the Renaissance, the classicals, and also the philosopher that claimed the same arguments that he brought in. And it was starting to be some screaming and yelling and some, yeah, it was a fraction, of course, stood up and said that Odd was not capable to speak about philosophy because he had no education in the same subject. But that was Odd very much used to. That isn't it? So in the end, I remember one argument, kind of analogy, that professor said that, listen to this, Odd, this is my statement, he said. Yes, I listen. You can't put a human living being into the so-called Die Weltmaschine. That means that, yeah, that's eating machine, that eating time, typical. You can't put a living human into that machine backwards and go back and wait for a piece of soap. I think Odd was not that curious about Immanuel Kant, but he stayed with the more classical ones, I think. I think Aristotle was a man for his life. I think he found a kind of covering for his the totality of being human being. I think he found Aristotle could fit him very well in many occasions.
Because it was so interesting that you mentioned it. I wasn't aware of that he was concerned with Aristotle at the time, but I I do know this specific lecture that you're referring to. He did criticize Hegel, and Hegel, of course, is talking about the need to be bounded to your time. There's no other option. And what was so wonderful when we had Karl Korsnes here talking about Aristotle is that, of course, Aristotle is the more or less complete opposite of that. So, and of course, what year is this lecture then?
I spoke about recently.
Yeah.
82.
82.
Yes.
It's in the very beginning.
Yes.
So we're talking about perhaps always this difference between if something inspires you to something, or if it confirms what you sort of already are looking for. Is it what
it confirms. Yeah, you're right.
Because I mean, in the Origin of Inequality, Rousseau does talk about the nature state, and of course there's you wouldn't see it as a clear recipe to create archetypical images, but there are certain things there that I think you mentioned how Nerdrum would see, oh, here's something, I can use this, I can use this.
Yes.
And if it's what Rousseau actually meant, that's not the important issue.
No, exactly.
Right.
That's a hungry man finding pieces here and there, and in the end he has his beautiful meal.
Yeah. Right. So when Nerdrum then is increasingly concerned with philosophy and aesthetic philosophy as well, you mention in the book The Nerdrum School,
yes,
one book which was very decisive when it came to sort of making the pieces fall into place. Tell us that story.
Yes. Very typical again. You have something that's no value in your pocket, in your plastic bag, or hidden in your, everywhere. Odd see it with one eye and said, what's this? So after having been to dinner at my birthday, I was giving a book, a small, tiny book about an author I never heard about, Herman Broch. Opened it, and the name was Kitsch and Art, or Art and Kitsch. And I clearly understood that it was a hint, very much hint, that that was something for me. So from the front page, I should understand this. You are dealing with kitsch, and you don't understand what's art. So that's a beautiful dessert to have after a meal. I didn't open it I came to Odd Studio the day after in the evening, and I said that this was given to me by a common friend of ours. And yes, let me see it. Herman Broch. Yes, that sounds awful. The name sounds awful. Then it's very interesting. So I think he took one or two fragments of it and said, yes, I knew it. It was very, very interesting. The day after, another door was open, and he started to speak about kitsch.
Yeah.
And it went on, or still going on. Typical again, something you will just throw away as waste or having value of none. He creates huge story, important things for his own, for his art, and for his colleagues.
And I guess that this is a fitting moment to point out that the criticism that he has been had been subjected to, was more or less a blueprint of what Broch was talking about.
Exactly.
I mean, they were quoting Broch all the time, but not saying that where they had it from. Almost.
Oh. He said, "Oh, it's written about Porcini. Oh, look at this! It's about this and that. I love them all."
Yeah.
And in this connection, they are told to be kitsch.
Yeah.
And then, what's the final cut here? Yes, that means that I am also dealing with kitsch. If they are kitschy, I'm also kitschy.
Yeah.
So let's go into this stuff. And he went further. And he went to Herman Broch colleagues. He understood that Herman Broch was the leader of a kind of argument that took place and had their high time at the 60s, 50s and 60s. Even if Herman Broch wrote these things, I think it's early 30s. So it bloomed in the 50s and 60s mostly, this stuff. But Odd said, it's still there.
Yeah.
It's absolutely still there. And we can recognize the arguing from the critic that they have the Broch in their heart, or in their They have.
It's a different kind of
there is a kind of blood type that everybody could call Herman Broch blood. Yes, something like that. This is freely from my side. So.
I understand. Yes. It's a metaphor.
Yes. So he was adapted stuff and made it clear for us all that let's start speaking about real kitsch.
Yeah.
And not the level of kitsch. So a new confusion arose.
Yeah.
But he said that the lowest level of kitsch we knew everything about.
Yeah.
Because it was low and it was everywhere. The lowest level. The highest level is in the museums, and we admire it.
Yeah.
So why don't we just create the highest level of kitsch? Is there that's the whole solution for us. We just go into that stuff and of course avoid the lowest level. And we have a certain experienced ourselves what was the lowest level of kitsch. And that was the typical gypsy girl in the poster.
Yeah.
Or
So
the fisherman with his pipe here in Norway. We had some very typical examples of that. Yes.
And it's interesting then, because you also see the American painter Andrew Wyeth was subjected to the same type of criticism and even called the greatest living kitschmeister. I remember that the front page of Art News was for his 90th birthday. It said, Andrew Wyeth, sentimental or sophisticated, question mark.
Okay.
So you get in a quite,
Yes.
art or kitsch. Kitsch or art, yeah.
Yes, I think it's typical for Odd to dare to stand on that spot and say, I need to repeat it because you won't listen. And he's insisting, and we will see if he will go further on with that stuff. I have presented it to many of my colleagues. Of course, there is an alarm going on when you speak about kitsch, because they are not capable to reach the highest level. So they will always recognize themselves as the lower level. That's why they are so fanatic or so afraid and also anxious to adopt this kind of theory about kitsch. And I understand them in a certain way.
But that's so interesting.
Yes.
And it's so strange too. I remember reading a critic writing about some former students of Odd, more or less contemporary with you. And the treatment that they get are, as it is now, is, something of very low level.
Yes.
So in terms of social stature, there shouldn't be a great loss to go over.
No, it could be or should be, or it should be a kind of solution for some people, yes. It could be also the way to dominate your own life. I mean, you can change your values, you can declaim them, you can say that I'm dealing with this and I won't go to this argument because that's not my world at all. I stop here, this is my domain, this is my stuff. And I create my own borders.
When you engage with these things, you become more conscious about what you do, why you do it.
Yes.
I think that is an immense assistance and help. Yes. Because that's one thing I wanted to talk with you about. This whole, the social pressure.
Yes.
When it comes to being connected with Odd, and I guess if you're connected with Andrew Wyeth and people who rise to a certain level, it becomes a social pressure because they stand for values that are not socially acceptable.
Yes.
And I think you, as well as I, have seen not one or two, but perhaps more examples of people going to Odd to stick to Odd Nerdrum, and then they think that this is the place. And then they think with their social antennas, and they understand that they were wrong, opportunistically speaking.
Yes.
And then they change.
Yeah, to what?
Yeah, they become themselves, as they say. Which means that they're like everybody else.
Yes, never been themselves, but now they're going to be themselves. What a kind of dream it is. Yes, I understand that. I also understand people living under stress. I understand people living desperately for living. I also understand that people mostly are living under social pressure, yes. And okay, if your talents are good and you give it up, then the loss is there.
Yeah.
If you have no talents or just are in the field of art for a short period and then you become something else, it's not a great loss. You will become something else. You can dealing with films or movies, theater, whatever it is. But if you have a talent and you are more or less under that pressure you said, leaving your talent, then there is a loss for more than yourself. It's a loss of the talent.
So as I mentioned in the introduction, you had a somewhat bizarre experience of applying to the art academy in Oslo.
Yes.
Being denied a place there, and then afterwards coming back as a teacher.
Yes.
But first and foremost, tell us about that situation where you applied to the academy.
Oh, it's an anecdote that belongs to my personal life. I share it as often I can. No, it's a very psychedelic. I mean, it's what's up and what's down in this life. Sooner or later, we will find out. But we were youngsters. We were told that if you if you join the academy, you will have a free time. Not a free time for learning or teaching or something, but you have a nice free time for at least 3-4 years. It was a privilege to come to the academy, but we were born. In the academy at that time, they have no idea what we were asking for. I mean, we were asking for something special. We won't have professional models. We wanted to have space enough to have an easel. We wanted to paint with oil. We wanted to use turpentine. All those things was said that they couldn't bring up. They couldn't show up with that. But we insisted on that. We said that we are equal to the other ones. They wanted to use the technology, modern things. They wanted to use fragments of whatever it was. But we just wanted to do this, study exactly this. So we were born. It will be a conflict, and it was. So the tradition for coming or joining the academy at that time was really a tradition, because it was said that you should show up for 1 week and draw at least a fully scale model.
So this was sort of left over from the
Yes,
tradition of
that
actually
was the
knowing.
really test of your skills. And the model showed up, took a pose and said, okay, we start. And the girls, most of the girls, crying out, they were not prepared for that. They'd never been in touch with drawing a model. So I went around and helped them. After the test, yes. I think they were very happy about that kind of experience we already had from old studio to draw from model.
Right.
Yes, I think they were very happy about that. So in the end, after this week with a test, we were called for an interview. They wanted to know more about us personally in this interview, and the first one was, what do you like? Where have you been? Who are your friends? What do you want with academy? And so on. And before I was finished with the answers, one of them said, I recognize you. You have been a student of Bork Nerdrum. I have seen you before. I've seen you in the newspaper. Touched. Oh, yeah. Yeah, you're right. Yes, we have an exhibition at Galleri Vang, and it's called Nerdrum School. Oh, I can't. She used a lot of nasty words about Odd and personally, and said that there's no hope. There's no hope for you. We can't give you anything here.
She told you directly?
Yeah, no, she said it indirectly, because she said, I will never support that kind of figurative art. And that was, then the case was closed, because every member in this group, testing group, had an option. So even if there was 5 who said, yes, let him in, one could say, I deny him to come in.
They had a veto?
Yeah. And that was it. So one person that couldn't dare Odd for one reason or 2 or 3 said that, drop this man. He's just a pupil or student, whatever, from all the problems we know about. We have to block them out.
Mhm.
And that's the end of that test. So later on, it was given, yes, back in 1997, 5 years later on. It was already mentioned, a tradition in sculpture went out with this very skilly and very strong man called Per Trygve.
Sculptor, yeah.
Yeah, sculpturing. And so the headmaster went to the department and asked for help to continuing that kind of education in Norway. And at the same time, the statesman said that, yes, we will also bring one strong force for painting into the academy.
So that came to the
So that
they
he opened
decided
up
without the academy wanting.
He wanted to open up and give the budget they had more money into it, and said that makes it free. And then the conflict started at once, because everybody knew from the very start that one of the candidates, no, it was really just one candidate for painting, and that was Odd.
Mm.
And they knew it instantly, that he will come into their private, more or less, their community they have in academy. And the conflict was the first, it was directly on the news every hour in the television.
Right.
Yeah, it was on that level.
I remember.
It increased, and Odd said, I drop it. I'll leave it. We stop here. It's just a conflict, one more conflict. We just stop it there. And everybody relaxed. Everybody went to sleep again. And a friend of Odd was given the same possibility that Odd was told to take, and so on. He said that I want somebody to support me, and he asked me to support him for a short while. It was 1997, and we couldn't even join the academy surroundings. We had to find another space outside the academy, and I think that
you were put in another building.
Yes, absolutely, outside. Yes, I think it went on for 10 years, 8 years, perhaps 8 years, and I think it was about 5 to perhaps as many as 20 students that went through this education with figurative painting, and then it stopped again. Dead.
Just shut down.
Yeah, shut down. It was shut down. Conflict is very good in a sense. Twisting things. Back, forward, up and down. But to living in a twist the whole life through, it's very hard. So to twist something, it could be fruitful for your own life. It could be... Oh, I would be very surprised if I didn't got any kind of criticism. No, that's one of his achievements in his life, going through all that criticism. Yes, if they're giving him medals and champagne or whatever it is, he wouldn't be Odd Nerdrum at all.
I think there's this story about Donatello coming to some city where he was celebrated to the point where he just had to flee.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. Every way of thinking has its borders, has its limits, created by yourself or put on your life from somebody else. But as Odd transformed it anarchistically, as an anarchist, true anarchist, he has no that kind of limits, no kind of borders. He just wanted to do it. He likes to do it. And it's also very important that he wants to do it. So that's our support for this project. We wanted him to create a picture we can't paint ourselves. Happy for that.
Per Lundgren, thank you for coming to the Cave of Pellis.
Thank you for having me.